Hi, welcome back to Celebrating Culture. We're coming to you from St Francisville, Louisiana, and we're at a great museum here, and I'm with Cliff Deal. Cliff is a great historian. He's been with Louisiana for many years throughout the state, and just the knowledge is incredible. Cliff, welcome to the show.
Hi, glad to meet you.
So Cliff, tell us a little bit about St Francisville and this museum.
The museum is operated by the West Feliciana Historical Society, and that's a group of people who were joined together back in the 1960s to try to save the culture and history of this beautiful town. Highway 61 is filled with historic places, and St Francisville is really one of them. When you come to St. Francisville and you visit the museum, you get a picture of the entire history of St. Francisville up to this point. You get to see some of the cultural nature of our history as well. We have tremendous diversity of culture and religions, and the West Feliciana Historical Society is all about saving all of these cultures and really trying to tell the story of how we live together and maintaining that cultural history.
Tell me the history of how Bayou Sara got started.
Well, Bayou Sara was at one point the most important port on the Mississippi River between New Orleans and Natchez because it fed the Mississippi River flatboats with cotton and other things that were grown here and shipped down to New Orleans and to the world. It was a great riverboat town. Fantastic hotels and stores there. Sometimes people like to say that St. Francisville was where the schools and the churches were, and Bayou Sara was where the action was. So it was just like any other port in the world and had a lot of character in it.
Cliff, I understand there's a great history here. I've been told that St. Francisville was once the capital of its own country.
St. Francisville was the capital of its own country. That was in the 1810 Revolution, where the West Florida and East Florida, which were Spanish, were not contained in the Louisiana Purchase. So the people in St. Francisville got together and decided that they were going to join the United States eventually, but they wanted to form their own country if nobody else would do it. So they did that. They wrote a constitution and made a flag, and they had a small army, and they overwhelmed the Spanish fort at Baton Rouge, and they became the West Florida Republic. It was the shortest lived republic in history, I believe, 74 days, but it was enough to make President Madison pay attention and to include them in the United States.
Tell me about their flag.
The original flag that flew over the then capital of West Florida Republic, which was in St. Francisville, one of the signers of the Constitution, Isaac Johnson, it was sewn by his wife. She sewed this bright blue field with a white star on it, the 5 points of which were the 5 relationships of friendship in the community. They took it down to Baton Rouge with them to the Spanish fort and followed the milk cows in when they were corralled and brought in the morning through the back door of the fort. They captured the fort, which set them on their way to becoming their own country later in 1810. It is the original Lone Star flag, and it was called the Bonnie Blue back then.
During the Civil War, there was a day the war stood still.
Bayou Sara had become a flashpoint for the Northern Navy to attack because there were rebels who were operating in this area. The rebels occasionally would take pot shots at the northern ships as they passed by. So the ships occasionally would fire into the town. There was a ship that was in the river and they had some trouble. The captain had died on board, and it was a Yankee ship. They pulled into the Bayou Sara port there and wanted to see what they could do about perhaps burying the captain in the town. Well, come to find out, he was a Mason, and there was a very strong Masonic presence here in St. Francisville. So all the Masons got together and decided that they would stop the war for a day. There would be no firing, there would be no agitation, and they would bury the captain of that ship. And so they did. They had a funeral procession up from Bayou Sara to the Episcopal Church, and he is buried right there in the Episcopal Cemetery by the church. And it is the day the war stopped.
Tell me about the West Feliciana Railroad.
The West Feliciana Railroad, it was an important railroad because it was the third railroad built in the United States, and it was the first standard gauge railway. And then last but not least, it was the first interstate railroad.
So what are some of the great things about St. Francisville?
Well, today, St. Francisville, it's steeped in history. I mean, you can't turn a corner that you don't see something that's 120 years old and, in fascinating shape. And we have plantations that were still around that now are bed and breakfast. We have haunted ones like the Myrtles. We have great stores, good restaurants. You can find something interesting around every corner. Two of the state museums are Oakley and Rosedale. Oakley, of course, is famous for Audubon visiting in the 1820s.
So Cliff, if people want to know more, is there a website?
Yes, there's a website, westfelicianahistory.com.
Cliff, I want to thank you for being on the show, and I really want to encourage people to get on Highway 61 and come to St. Francisville. Great things to see and do, the plantations, the museums, the food, the dining, the river. It's just a wonderful place to come and understand Louisiana. We'll be right back with more of Celebrating Culture.